absolutely necessary for the functioning of the country. But if you look carefully at the list of clients of one of the largest Russian oil companies, you will definitely find Poles there.
And Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has slammed the West, accusing it of once again trying to undermine stability in his country. The South American nation was gripped by violent riots following Sunday's presidential election after both sides declared victory. Venezuela's election commission announcing Maduro as the winner with over 50% of the vote, while the country's opposition leader rejected the result as fraudulent.
This is not the first time we are facing what we are facing today. They are trying to impose in Venezuela a fascist and counter-revolutionary coup d'etat again. The same countries and fascist far-right groups run by US imperialism that supported the self-proclaimed president Juan Guaido in 2019 are questioning the electoral process in Venezuela.
This has been Matt Boyland with your TNT News Brief. I'll be back with more at the top of the next hour.
This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. Here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. Our mission is to shine more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to uncover the truth. And I always feel that it's vital not just to ask the questions, but also to question the answers. So today we're going to look at the threats against Venezuela and also claims of foreign interference in elections worldwide. And to help me do that, I'm delighted with the usual team of Martin J and Dr. George Szamuely. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Good to be with you.
I almost don't need to do it, but they will never forgive me if I don't. I've got to tell you who they are. Martin J is an award-winning journalist and editor of Maghreby.org and Levantis.me. His career spans over 30 years, which has seen him work and upset virtually every big media title that ever there was. And on his Twitter X page, he proudly proclaims he's been fired by all of the media giants, but his favourite is TNT, especially the Muckrakers, because we look after him. We haven't fired him yet. CNN, however, I'm beginning to understand their quote. A good journalist, but a pain in the backside is what they say. So we love all that sort of stuff. And Dr. George Szamuely, I'm always happy to promote his book. He's a senior research fellow at Global Policy Institute in London. He's written for innumerable publications and is author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's humanitarian war on Yugoslavia. Now, before we get into this whole thing about election and interference, I want to talk about the breaking news we had overnight of Hamas, who says its leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed while staying in Tehran. He was killed in an airstrike about 2 o'clock local time, reports say. And the group blames Israel for the attack. Israel, as I understand, not yet responded, but they previously vowed to eliminate Hamas's leader. It comes hours after Israel said it killed a senior Hezbollah commander in a strike in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. And the attacks on 2 senior Iran-backed militant leaders in the space of 24 hours has raised fears of further regional conflict. One of my big concerns is, apart from being very high up in Hamas, he was also one of the leaders in terms of negotiating a ceasefire. And whilst we're obliged in the UK to say that Hamas is a proscribed terrorist group, not just in the UK, but at various other places around the world, he was of the instrumental people, one of the instrumental people in negotiating what hopefully was going to be a peace deal. What's your take on all of this, George?
Well, I think you summed it up very well. I mean, he was one of the key figures in the so-called peace ceasefire negotiations that the Biden administration claimed that he was brokering, and that it had claimed it was already almost done. We're in the last 10-yard line, and it's very hard to see how these negotiations can continue if one of the key figures within the negotiation has been assassinated. And then, you have to assume that that was the objective. And, to be honest, it was always very unlikely that these ceasefire negotiations would succeed, for the obvious reason that Israel had no interest in signing any kind of ceasefire. And then it was always dishonest on the part of the Biden administration to claim, oh, we're almost there, everybody's on the same page, when over and over again, Netanyahu said that there's going to be no ceasefire until we've achieved our wartime objectives, which is the complete destruction of Hamas. Well, that means you intend complete victory, and therefore you're not interested in any kind of ceasefire. So that obviously is, I think it's not going to be, no more negotiations, at least for quite a while. But the other issue, and this is something we're going to talk about, is this is a big failure for Iran. And I think, that's something that we're going to have to really address, that this is a major humiliation of Iran, and not the first over the recent times. And Iran's going to have to step up and do something, because it's really being shown to be rather a paper tiger.
Yeah, and he lived, basically, he was from Gaza. He lived in Qatar for several years, and he was in Tehran, I understand, for the inauguration of Iran's president. Martin?
Yeah, I'm saddened by these events. I think there's a multitude of messages to unravel there. I think George probably hit the nail on the head when he talked about Iran and Iran's vulnerability. A lot of analysts in the region are talking about this online now and saying that this on its own, just detaching yourself from the implications of the peace talks, just the fact that the Israelis can carry out a strike like that within Iran really does highlight Iran's vulnerability. And politically, internally, the dynamic is now weaker than it ever was. And the Iranians will have to do something about that. They will have to step up to the mark and improve their security internally, and also make a bold statement to the Israelis in return. And so, Haniyeh, I hope I've pronounced his name right, he did live in Gaza. He's an interesting character. He lost 3 of his 4 sons and about 20 family members in the Gaza bombing. And I think for him to be removed now from the equation sends more than one message. First of all, clearly Israel is not even remotely serious about any sort of peace talks. Hot on the heels of Netanyahu coming from Washington, where he was told by Joe Biden, wrap it up now. He clearly isn't, because once that ends, I think that if there is a ceasefire of any sort, he fears that that's the end of his political virility, that he will actually be, he can only stay in office as he keeps this war going, and he believes that's his political right, if you like. But I think secondly, you have to look at a strike like that and interpret it from a geomilitary perspective. In many respects, Israel is not doing very well against Hezbollah with this constant exchange of ordnance over the Israeli border on a daily basis. Hezbollah has had a number of key strikes in the last few weeks, which have really, I think, struck at the heart of Israel's vulnerability, militarily speaking. But Israel, if the rumors are to be believed, in the last few days, from what I'm hearing from people in Lebanon, there is going to be an imminent war of some sort, and Israel has ambitions of going up to the river, Litani River again, as it did in 2000, and occupying all that huge swathe of land in the south. It's going to be a different story this time than 2000 or even 82, because Hezbollah is now much bigger, more powerful, has a lot more sophisticated equipment, And its plan now, which is the worst kept secret in the Middle East, Hezbollah's plan, if that were to happen, is to, within a matter of hours, take a huge swathe of land on Israel's side as well. And one has to wonder what this strike is really saying. Is it a message to Iran that we have this sophisticated kind of weaponry that you don't have? We can actually send a bomb from thousands of miles away to hit somebody's living room within an apartment block. Hezbollah's weaponry is very sophisticated indeed, much, much more than it was in 2006. But I'm not sure they've got exactly that kind of match. We may well see in the next few days, but I would say they haven't. And I think it's a message from the Israelis. Look, if you think you advance, if you think you can advance on the battlefield of southern Lebanon or Israel, we will always be able to take out your leaders. So think again. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation, which I'm more leaning towards, is that I think we're also getting very close to an intervention, a Western intervention, which would halt this war, because things are getting really out of hand. And usually what happens in the Middle East is when both sides are about to agree to suspend fighting for talks to begin, usually they like to get a few last shots in, because that builds up their trove of what they can negotiate with. It may well be that Israel is planning some sort of ceasefire brokered by the Americans, and they wanted to get a couple of points over. And this is a very good way of doing it. But to hit Israel, to hit Hezbollah, to hit all of its enemies in one go and really come out of it on top, I think it was a very effective blow. Israel will be very happy with it. The other thing that Israel will be countering on, and I would assume that this was part of the strike, part of their thinking, is that to take out somebody so senior within Iran guarantees a massive retaliation, a huge retaliation on Iran's part. May not be in the next few days, may well be in the next few weeks, because Iran and Hezbollah both serve the dish of revenge very coldly. They don't react very, very quickly. It's not a passionate attitude. But I think part of the ploy to bring in America, to drag America into a regional war, Netanyahu will figure that he could easily lose 100 or 200 Israeli citizens in a city in Israel by an Iranian strike, which would then justify a full-out international war with America helping the Israelis. He'll write that off. He would happily do that. We've seen how he happily kills his own people during October 7th, where the IDF just slaughtered a number of Israelis, and so I think that we should also factor that into it. We could be looking at a strategic planned retaliation which Netanyahu will want to capitalize on.
Yeah, and you make some very interesting points there. As you say, Netanyahu, I always remind you of that movie Wag the Dog, the 1997, where a war was started, albeit it was started in a production studio, to basically distract people from problems at home. And Netanyahu's got quite a few problems at home, and bribery charges and so on and so forth. But you do make an interesting point that this might be the last thing before a deal is done, and if that's sort of following the patterns of history. Let me just get your thoughts on that, George, before the break.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It's an interesting theory, but if the United States at the moment is entirely bogged down with the election. It just isn't focusing on international affairs. Biden is a lame duck president. He really doesn't have the authority to engage in any serious diplomacy, whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's in Israel. So I would have doubts whether that's going on. It's possible, but I don't think that's the case. The other thing is that Iran, has this, it's for over the past few years. It's sat back, allowed its nuclear scientists to be assassinated one after another. It then, General Soleimani, its national hero, was assassinated. The Americans kindly, very generously said, okay, we will allow you to give us a token response. No one gets hurt. Not a single American is going to get killed. But at least you'll be able to feel good about yourself that you were allowed a token response and we didn't retaliate. And then something similar happened after the assassination of its commanders in the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Iran retaliated, but it gave advance warning. The Americans, the British, the Jordanians all made sure that none of their missiles actually did any damage. They didn't even hit Israeli territory. So this is really one humiliation after another. I mean, Iran is a big country and he wants to be a regional player, but it just isn't really up to par. I mean, there may well be all sorts of reasons for it. But, if you want to be in that playing with the big boys, Russia, China, America, and so on, Iran at the moment is just looking rather as a joke. And I'm sure Iran will retaliate, but it's hard to believe that it's going to be any more effective than what happened in April of this year.
Yeah, again, some very interesting points. Okay, a break is upon us. When we come back, we're going to look at the threats against Venezuela and also claims of foreign interference in elections worldwide. We're going to be back after these messages.
JDRF's vision is to create a world without type 1 diabetes. The type 1 diabetes community is at the heart of everything JDRF does. We were founded by the type 1 diabetes community. In the main, we are governed by the type 1 diabetes community, we're energised by the type 1 community, and we're accountable to the type 1 diabetes community. It's on their behalf that we exist, and it's on their behalf that we must succeed. JDRF exists to rid the world of type 1 diabetes. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. So for us, that means rallying all the resources and all the people and all the organisations required to make that a reality as quickly as possible. The world's best researchers, exciting innovative companies, and the passion of the type 1 diabetes community, then delivered through the health system so lives get better every day, day after day, until the day we find a cure. To everybody in the type 1 diabetes community, no matter your age or stage with the disease, whether you were diagnosed recently or a long time ago, we need you to know that we are here working on your behalf to deliver a world without type 1 diabetes as quickly as we can. Thank you to everybody who's supported JDRF in so many ways. You are making our vision of a world without type 1 diabetes possible.
A better business tip from TNT Radio. The benefits of advertising on today's news talk, TNT Radio, should be clear to businesses of any shape or size. It can be accessed anywhere, anytime, by anybody, and is the perfect way to build brand awareness and stimulate digital activity. If you'd like more information about advertising on TNT Radio, simply fill out your details on our contact page and we'll be in touch. To find out more, go to tntradio.live.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm joined by Martin Jay and Dr. George Szamuely, and we've been looking at developments around the world. And today's special is looking at elections and interference. And in particular, Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez has accused the Western-backed opposition of attempting a coup, and he's condemned widespread rioting in the wake of President Nicolas Maduro's election victory. George, I want to start with you on this one, as you're much more of an expert than a lot of us on this. Well, what evidence is there of Western interference in Venezuela?
Well, the Western interference in Venezuela consists of innumerable coups that have been sponsored by the Western powers. There was one against Chavez about 20 years ago by the George W. Bush administration. And of course, there was one under Trump when the United States and then, of course, its European Union allies decided that they would withdraw their recognition of Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela and decided to recognize as president someone who hadn't run for office at all, was Juan Guaido. And lo and behold, they said, Juan Guaido, he is the president of Venezuela. Of course, he wasn't president of anything. But as part of that recognition of Guaido as the president, the British seized the gold bullion, Venezuelan gold bullion that was lying in the vaults of the Bank of England, and the British still hold that. were refusing to return this to Maduro because they said, well, it doesn't belong to Maduro, it belongs to Guaido. So the interference has been long and it's obviously ongoing. But what we're witnessing now is a classic pattern of color revolutions. I mean, the way these color revolutions work is you have an election. Then when the election results come in and the Western-backed candidate has failed to win, then essentially, out comes a rent-a-mob and proclaim that, no, we won, election fraud, the election was stolen from us. And then, of course, they demand that the Western powers intervene, impose sanctions, and worse. I mean, we saw this pattern. Of course, the classic case was in Belgrade in 2000 against Slobodan Milosevic, saying, "Oh well, that's it. Milosevic has to step aside." But he said, "Hey, the results don't show that he had lost." And then, of course, then there are threats. Well, if the military don't step in and remove him, then who knows what we're gonna do. So that happened. That was in 2000. Then they played the same game in Georgia, the so-called Rose Revolution in 2003, when they got rid of Shevardnadze, who had been a kind of a Western puppet, but he just wasn't quite as compliant as the Americans wanted. So they replaced him with someone even more compliant, which is Saakashvili. Then, of course, we had the Orange Revolution the next year in 2004. It's always the same pattern. Election, immediate cries of fraud. In comes the West saying that you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to rerun this election. You got to change the result. And then, of course, we saw that in Kyrgyzstan, the Tulip Revolution, 2005. We had that. Something similar in Armenia. I think that was called the Velvet Revolution. But it's the same pattern. You have the election, and then in comes the West and cries foul. Oh God, things have to change. Otherwise, we're going to get really nasty.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it, looking at those patterns? And I think this is why it's relevant. You can get someone who's an expert on Venezuela, but look at the patterns about how this happens around the world in other elections. What's your take on it, Martin?
Yeah, I think election interference is a kind way of saying regime change, isn't it? In many ways, because if you look at the history of America's intervention since the end of the Second World War, I mean, it's documented quite well. There's something like 80 or 81 cases of election interference. Now, the Americans would always argue, yeah, well, most of that was Cold War stuff. We had a lot to do out there. We had a lot of communist parties coming into in Central and South America and around the world. But I think there's been a transition. I think we've moved from backing coups d'etats around the place or backing dictators that we like to modernizing this whole idea of how to change elections for the good of America or for the West, principally America, I must say. I think we've now transitioned to a new modern internet age where George quite rightly points out, these are now the color revolutions. This is now where State Department officials can liaise with opposition groups and try and help them get into power. If they don't get into power, then you've got the plan B of organizing demonstrations, which are often violent, but election interference is nothing new. It's been around for a very long time, and it's extraordinary how when you use those words election interference to most Americans, they immediately come out with, oh, Russiagate, yeah, 2016. And they find it, Americans, in particular Americans, but I would say Westerners generally find it very, very difficult to swallow that we in the West have been doing election interference for a very, very long time around the world, particularly the Americans, but a lot with the help of the British. Who could forget the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in Congo, who was replaced by Mobutu? Who could forget that cable that the British MI6 agent sent to his American counterpart when the Brits said, well, Mobutu, is he really the right guy for the job, and isn't he a son of a bitch? And the reply from the American was, yes, he is a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And I think if you apply that rationale to all of these dictatorships around the world, this is really what America is trying to do. It's trying to install its far-right candidate who will play by the rules, who will do the aid and trade, as America says, who will do the hegemony, who will support America on all of its policies, ultimately for America's financial gain. But, it's when you look at it, when you put election interference under the microscope, it's sometimes it seems to be quite benign, and I suppose on one end of the scale, it can be just something very simple as American embassy officials having cozy drinks with foreign correspondents in a lot of these places and just relaying them their ideas about who is the good guy and who is the bad guy coming up to elections. It can be helping with parties' advertising material, campaigning material. It can also go further towards the incumbents themselves with threatening to withdraw aid unless you hold a fair election, this sort of thing, But if you look back in history, George touched on 2000 Serbia, which was very interesting because the West got what it wanted in former Yugoslavia through a nefarious and disingenuous policy of basically setting up staged atrocities so that NATO airstrikes could be guaranteed, which was a game changer immediately in the summer of 1995. But then when Milosevic ran elections in 2000, the Americans had to go further and say, we can't let this guy come back. Under no circumstances are we going to let this guy. And they funded the opposition. They gave the opposition a lot of money and a lot of media airtime, and it worked. And I think looking at today's intervention in Venezuela, almost certainly there has been some election interfering. Certainly. Trump, during the Trump period in 2019, John Bolton virtually admitted it a few months ago on CNN. He sort of opened his mouth just a little bit too wide and said that, I've got a lot of experience in staging coups in South America. And everyone knew that he was talking about Venezuela. So I think the Venezuelans are right. You just have to look at really the history. Going back to 1986, maybe you may remember baby Doc Duvalier in Haiti, who was America's incumbent there. He was kicked out by a reasonably fair election. And then, the Americans did everything they could to reinstate their guy down there. Often it's just money. In 1991, the Americans, if you remember, gave Yeltsin a loan of $10 million, which must have been a huge amount of money in 1991. And the same thing for Havel in then Czechoslovakia. He was also financially backed to the hilt. And so that actually was a game changer. And I think, these days it's much, much more sophisticated. It's a lot more to do with cyber attacks, controlling Facebook and other social media platforms, and winning the narrative. And media plays a huge role in that, no question about it. And so I think what we're witnessing in Venezuela is it shouldn't really be so surprising. It was inevitable that the incumbent there now is not a friend of the West, has a socialist ideology, is a friend of Russia, and we're going to get these sour grapes for a long time, not just from the West, not just from the British, also from people like Elon Musk, who is doing everything he can on Twitter to discredit Maduro. So I think it's early days yet, but when we talk about election interfering, we really do have to take our hats off and salute the Americans as the champions of all. They really do win all the medals.
Yeah, no, it is extraordinary. And as a lawyer, I was like, whilst it's circumstantial evidence, you sort of turn around and look for actual evidence of election interference. And we've touched on some of that. Motivation is also key as well. And obviously, Venezuela have significant oil and other resources that the West want to control. George?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Venezuela is prime real estate. It's one of the biggest oil reserves in the world. And as often happens with the United States, when it loses a power, and I think it lost that power when Chavez became president, the Americans are just very, very angry and want to return to the status quo ante. The same thing happens in Iran. Remember, Iran was really the granddaddy of all coups when the United States, with the help of the British, overthrew this nationalist prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. This was in 1953, and then installed into power essentially a kind of puppet regime. Now, the Iranians, of course, never forgot that, and it's caused a lot of bitterness over the years in Iran, and led to the coup against the Shah of Iran in 1978. So 25 years. It just so happened that the Shah was just so incompetent. He having been installed into power. The whole, he suddenly, it's like, like Pinocchio, the child made of wood thinks he's a real child. So the Shah really thought he was a big leader, a major, towering figure on the world stage. He was nothing of the sort. He made one disastrous mistake after another and led to his overthrow. But this is, the Americans, ever since then, ever since the overthrow of the Shah, they've been dreaming of bringing Iran back, to return to the great days of the Shah. And that explains so much of the American animus, hatred towards Iran, and why it continues essentially waging a kind of a clandestine war against Iran. Now, the Americans, of course, when they stage these coups, they can be very, very nasty. I mean, in the case of Milosevic, the vote did not really favor the opposition, but the military had been so infiltrated by American agents that they pretty much encouraged the military, hey, well, why don't you do the Ceausescu option? Just kill him. We know this. I mean, the generals, sub-generals have admitted, yeah, that's what the Americans were encouraging us, just kill him. So the generals then went to Milosevic and said, well, we could kill you, or you can just simply step aside and then we'll save your life. And then Milosevic decided to step aside, and for the time being, his life was saved. But of course, he was bundled off to The Hague, where he died, suddenly died. And this is the way the United States operates. As Martin said, that when you talk about election interference, Americans say, oh, yeah, it's what the Russians did. But you think there's a whole history, since World War II, when you just go on and on. I mean, we talk about Italy. How many times did the Americans interfere in Italy to prevent the communists from coming to power? This happened, almost immediately after the war. But this went on, into the 1960s and 1970s, that were interfering to prevent the communists from coming to power. But all of that is just hardly gets any understanding, any voice in the media. So, election interference is Russia. Ursula von der Leyen talks, about, this, we're all in danger of, Russian interference. And then you say, yeah, but what exactly are you doing right now in Georgia? You are absolutely massively interfering and involving yourself in Georgia to get a government in there that's going to be reliably anti-Russian. But that's okay. I mean, that's fine. It's, we can interfere. It's interference is only bad when the Russians do it. So there's so much dishonesty about it, and people really know very little about this, because it's assumed, well, when we interfere, that's for democracy. It's for good things. We're gonna, good things will arise as a result of our interference. Well, look at Saakashvili. Saakashvili was installed by the Americans and led Georgia to an absolute catastrophe. But the Americans were quite happy with it when he launched his attack on South Ossetia. And of course, then the Russians interfered. And of course, it led to a disastrous defeat for Georgia. And I think that has shaped Georgian perceptions. I mean, they're not pro-Russian by any stretch of the imagination, but they don't want to get involved in another conflict with Russia. So, we're interfering in Georgia to bring about democracy. No, you've interfered and brought complete disaster on Georgia. And of course, we can talk about Ukraine as a separate case. Again, Ukraine, they interfered twice. In 2004, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Orange Revolution, when the victory of Viktor Yanukovych was overturned thanks to Western intervention. And then again in 2014 through the coup in Maidan, when again Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown. And we can see the result for Ukraine.
Yeah, go for it, Martin.
Ukraine's a brilliant example, and one of the best examples, really, because it's so well documented. I mean, if people want to read about it, a lot of it's already online. You know, the two key points of 2004, 2014. Yes, Yanukovych was Russian, was pro-Russian, and it just really irked the Americans that they needed to get this guy out, and the extent that they went to is just breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. You know, and so if you want an example of how election interfering, when it goes horribly wrong, when it blows up in the face of the West, because now we are paying the huge price of sanctions that haven't worked, that have actually backfired on us. You know, Ukraine is a brilliant example, absolutely brilliant example, and still ongoing. We haven't learned the lessons, and it's just extraordinary how there is this self-righteous sort of zeal that Westerners have, particularly Americans, that election interfering can't be election interfering if we're doing it because we are the good guys with the white cowboy hats, and we go to church every Sunday, and we eat hot apple pie and play baseball on Sunday afternoons with our kids. Everybody else is just evil and degenerate and smelly and probably don't wipe their bottoms properly, and that's a sort of paternalistic crap that we have to live with, which results in Ukraine, which is, as I said, an ongoing nightmare. So, I mean, we should count our lucky stars that America didn't do such a good job in Venezuela and that things are still holding together there. But it never gives up. We've learned this. It's like a bulldog getting its mouth into a stick. I don't think the Americans will ever give up with Venezuela. And was it just the other day that Trump said, Venezuela, we lost all that oil, and I just thought, God.
Well, there's an honesty about that, isn't there? There you go.
There's some honesty, some brutal honesty there.
But it's absolutely right. It's what I was saying beforehand. You've got to look at the motive. And the reason history repeats itself is because we don't learn the lessons from history. So if you say, look, why is there a potential for election interference? What possible benefit could there be? And you say, well, often it's to do with oil or other resources and so on and so forth. And then you've got your motive. And then you can look for evidence. Just before we leave Venezuela, however, just before the break, Edmundo Gonzalez, who was the runner-up, he claimed that he was the rightful winner. Thousands of his supporters took to the streets alleging vote rigging. Is there any evidence of that, George?
Well, I haven't seen it. I mean, these are all allegations. And these are allegations that always come after every election. All the saying, oh, well, this tally doesn't match what our tally is. But these are all claims. They are just claims. Well, according to our count, he won overwhelmingly by 2-1 margin. But that's all. It's so far, there's no evidence has been presented. So, you've got all of these foreign leaders, some of the Organization of American States, and of course the European Union leaders, who are all calling into question the election, but they're not basing it on any evidence at all. They are going entirely by the claims of the opposition, who claim, oh, we've got our tallies, and according to that, we have won overwhelmingly, but we haven't seen that. So there's nothing to base these claims on. Is it possible that there's some shenanigans? Probably. I mean, we know all about the election shenanigans that take place in the United States. I hope that the elections in Venezuela were a little bit cleaner and better than the 2020 elections in the United States.
Yeah, but if I can cut in, there are always irregularities in elections, always. And the thing that I noticed about all of these elections around the world in these hotspots where you have an incumbent which the West doesn't want to stay, or sometimes the other way around, the West wants to keep its incumbent there, is they send monitors, election monitors. Now, election monitors, by definition, we all think, oh, the EU is sending election monitors to a West African country. We all think, oh, that can't be a bad thing, right? But what I've noticed after being in Brussels for 11 years, and a lot of my friends being recruited to become election monitors. You go on a plane and you put on this silly jacket and you visit a country in Africa or Asia for a few days, and perhaps it's a bit of fun, there's a bit of excitement there. But what I noticed, there's a nefarious undertone to election monitoring. And it goes like this. The West, America or the EU sends election monitors. If they find something which goes against their guy, then they'll flag it up and say, oh, look, irregularities, boxes went missing, or were stuffed. But if they find something that, by the same token, goes against their incumbent, then they don't say anything at all. And you have to understand, why would incumbent presidents of African countries want the EU election monitors to turn up? It's for this very reason, because they've already done a deal. They've already done a deal with the EU, which says, don't worry, our election monitors won't turn over any irregularities on your side. We'll only turn over the ones to your opponents. So I'm very, very skeptical about election monitors. And that's just one other strand of many of the dirty tricks that we get up to in many of these countries just for our own geopolitical gains.
Yeah, and it's absolutely right to call out those dirty tricks. Lots of people in social media are bursting a blood vessel. They're pointing out that not all Americans are categorized in the way that you were mentioning earlier, Martin, but some might be, so we should look at that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be looking at further election interference and also the role that AI might play. Don't touch that dial.
From weather and traffic reports to news of political developments,
we turn to journalists for the information we need to live our daily lives.
Journalists around the world provide the news that is essential for democracy,
for personal freedom, and for safety and stability.
Yet their ability to report freely and safely is under attack like never before.
Too many journalists are paying with their lives. They face exponential risks, and they've already paid a heavy toll.
Death threats, online harassment, and physical attacks
are becoming a daily experience of journalists in all countries.
We just want people to be safe, to be able to get our readers the information that they need to make informed decisions.
They checked my phone and realized that it was Pegasus. I feel myself like I am naked in the street.
These charges were politicized from the start.
Facts win. Truth wins. Justice wins.
C'est énorme pour moi d'être là, d'être libre, surtout que je ne m'y attendais pas du tout.
Stand with a free press.
Stand with journalists whose reporting won't be silenced. Press freedom is your freedom.
I tell my son, I love you every single day.
I love you.
Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. Now that he's a grandfather, he says, I love you to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious moment.
You're listening to the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers. Me, Andrew Eborn, Martin Jay, and Dr. George Szamuely, and we're looking at election interference around the world. And 2024 is the election year, the mother of election years. I think about 50 countries have gone to the polls. We've had our election here July the 4th, which is American Independence Day, and they're going to be having their election on Fireworks Day, November the 5th. Fireworks on both sides of the Atlantic as part of a special relationship. But the basic warnings that AI has had more of an impact on election this year than any other time in history. And there have been all sorts of warnings about that. I was looking at some examples. So in Spain, just before the national election, 2 days, there was a fake website which was mimicking an official Madrid site, posted a false warning about a possible attack by a disbanded Basque militant separatist group, ETA. In Poland, 2 days before the October parliamentary election, police responded to a false bomb threat at a polling station, and social media accounts linked to the Russian interference infosphere falsely claimed a device had exploded. And there was also a fake report surfaced claiming that Prime Minister Donald Tusk was mobilizing 200,000 men starting on July the 1st. The Polish news agency quickly removed the report and clarified that they weren't the source. And interestingly, in Slovakia, just a couple of days before parliamentary election, you remember the two candidates, it was virtually neck and neck, but all of a sudden there was emerged this AI-generated audio recording which falsely portrayed a candidate discussing plans to rig the election. There was also another fake recording surfaced where the same candidate was heard talking about raising the cost of beer, of all things. They went viral and led to one candidate, the pro-NATO, being defeated by an opponent who favoured closer ties to Moscow and Russian President Vladimir Putin. What's your take on this, George?
Well, it's a very good question, and we don't really yet know what impact AI will have, because at the same time, all of these cases that you cite, the fakery was exposed very quickly. It's not like it lasted a long time, and those are the more nefarious influences on an election, where the fakery goes on and is never challenged. So, for instance, the other day there was an AI generated a short ad purportedly from Kamala Harris, in which she's speaking. It sounds exactly like her, and she's saying, well, I'm the presidential candidate. I'm of course a complete idiot. I'm a moron, and so on.
That wasn't AI. That was real.
It's a moment of truth. We loved it.
But of course, I don't think anyone was really taken in by that. But if one thinks of, however, Russiagate, which we were talking about the other day, that was fake news, and continued to have a massive effect on that election. Now, we in the United States, we get again the fake news, which, however, because the mainstream media repeated, do get believed. I mean, there's some fakery involving J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, he had a habit of making love to his couch. Totally made up. It was a completely made up story in AP. And then the other day, we had the governor of Illinois taking part in an interview with ABC News. And he was saying, J.D. Vance, he's really weird. He was making love to a couch. And the ABC News anchor just let it go, and instead of saying to him, that's a fake story, that was, that's been refuted and is nonsense. But she allowed the governor of Illinois to come up with this nonsense. So AI may have a huge impact, but we're already having real problems with fakery that is advanced by the mainstream media. And of course, the mainstream media, they have their preferred candidates. And we know, we're really getting into the election season in the United States. They are absolutely determined, adamant in getting Kamala Harris over the finish line. So we can expect an awful lot of fakery and nonsense told about Kamala between now and November the 3rd, and again a lot of fakery about Trump and J.D. Vance. We're already getting this here about this word that's been coined, that they're weird. They're weird. He's weird. J.D. Vance is weird. Trump is weird. He's weird. He's a creep. And it's all. It kind of pervades the election space. And suddenly we're talking about nonsense like, well, this guy's weird or this guy's a creep, rather than anything serious. So the media, being what they are, have an enormous impact on election, and in a way, this is election interference. I mean, it's quite obvious election interference in that they're putting their thumb on the scale. They want their guy to win, and they're ready to put any kind of nonsense out there to get to ensure that their guy wins.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, 2017, the words of the year were fake news, and last year, 2023, was AI. You have that delicious fusion, and we have a big battle on our hands. I mean, diseased information age. We're drowning, aren't we, in a sea of disinformation and misinformation. And I always urge everybody to question everything. I present this series, you may know, Andrew Eborn's Fake or Fact, where we're looking at all these fake stories every single day. What's your take on it, Martin?
Well, I'm quite worried about JD Vance's sofa. I mean, I'm wondering how much that reflects on Craigslist. You know, one sofa slightly soiled, probably owned by JD Vance. It could sell for thousands. I'm not so worried about fake videos of politicians for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think people are quite skeptical when they see something like that. Secondly, the politicians have got the money. They've got the slush fund to go to their technical people and say, destroy this. You know, what's worrying me is that huge chasm, that huge space on the internet of just regular people who are being affected by fake news, and this new generation now of wannabe journalists who are manipulating the software and writing these stories. And we don't have, so far on the internet, we don't have a regulatory authority, we don't have software, we don't have any sort of measure which is searching out these stories. And my biggest worry actually is how huge organizations that already have a really tawdry track record on manipulating the media, like the European Union, will actually exploit AI. And yeah, it's bringing tears to your eyes. I can see it already.
No, I just worry that I have to put your dog on the payroll. That's the thing.
No, I'm going to have to apologise about the dog because he's a...
Don't apologise. What's your dog called?
He's a randy 7-month-old German Shepherd, and I've got a 5-year-old husky bitch who's on heat. So he's actually been taking care of her problems on a 30-minute sort of cycle, and I'm having to do something about it. So apologies for that. That wasn't AI. That's the reality of what I'm living with here. But my final message on AI is we have to watch people like the European Union. I think Ursula von der Leyen probably salivates when she thinks about the possibilities of AI.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ over here, its latest annual review, it basically pointed out that the rise of artificial intelligence is basically the massive, significant areas of risk to the electoral process. And we've had all sorts of fake recordings, and people are fooled by them. You can do all sorts of election statements. Some are genuine hot mic moments. Others have politicians saying all sorts of things, and you can make anybody say anything with anyone at any time. Are you scared about that, George?
I'm not sure as yet, because I think, as Martin pointed out, people have become quite skeptical, and these things, they tend to get refuted very quickly. I mean, that's the amazing thing, that when something is obviously fake news, it pops up on Twitter, and right away people are already spotting it. And I know that in recent times there have been any number of instances when some seemingly incendiary comment was attributed to a political leader, and within an hour it was already known that no, he didn't say that was just simply a piece of fakery. And even though it went out on Twitter and it looked absolutely spot on, well, this is pretty important. So I think people are skeptical of these things. I think the more serious thing, again, with the EU is the censorship regime that they intend to introduce, and in fact are already introducing under this sort of the Digital Services Act. This is now the law within the EU, and therefore they have the mandate to take down all kinds of postings that the EU deems fake. Now, of course, what they call fake isn't actually fake. It just simply is stuff that they don't like to hear. So anything that they say, oh, this is Russian propaganda, in other words, it's news that they don't like, they now have the absolute authority to do that. There's no First Amendment in the European Union. And I think this is going to be a very important thing going forward in Europe, particularly when there's the populist nationalists who are still around. They're going to be a force in coming years. And you've got the leadership of the EU that is absolutely determined to stop the populist nationalists. You watch how they use the Digital Services Act, how they pressure the social media to take down all kinds of messages that they don't like. And, that is going to be the absolute, worst kind of election interference.
Martin?
Yeah, he's hit the jackpot, hasn't he? Yes, election interference, exactly. That is really what we should be worrying about. And when those times come, they only come, in the EU's case, it's only once every 5 years, but you have 26 member states also, which the EU has its preferred candidates in. And I think we can expect a lot of skullduggery. When I was in Brussels, I was sued something like 6 times by MEPs, British MEPs, because they had the money and I had a very low circulation investigative magazine, which basically threw the spotlight on them a lot. And it's a very unfair organization. It's a very draconian, backward organization that doesn't really believe in anything to do with democracy at all. And I think we will, when AI really gets going, I think we will see a really dark side to the European Union and to a number of governments that we haven't seen before. The big question, which I can't answer, unfortunately, is I don't know what that does to media. Does it sort, the wheat from the chaff and generate a new generation of fringe media websites which have a good reputation of, sticking to the facts and have maybe jumped through a few hoops and have some sort of a reference from an organization.
I'll tell you what it does. I'll tell you what it does to you, Martin. It drives more people to tune into the Muckrakers, where we only have our unwavering press to the truth. We've run out of time. It's been a fascinating discussion. George and Martin, thank you so much indeed. You'll be back with us on Friday, and I will be back with the rest of you tomorrow here on TNT.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live. Now, TNT Radio News.
Back again with your hourly news brief. I'm Matt Boyland. Fears of an all-out war are growing in the Middle East after Israel bombed a residential building in Lebanon's capital, killing Hezbollah's chief of staff. Israel says the Hezbollah commander was responsible for Saturday's missile strike on Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, which killed 12 children.
This evening, the IDF carried out a targeted strike in Beirut on Fuad Shukur, also known as Said Muhsen, Hezbollah's most senior military commander.
Meanwhile, hours later, news broke that Hamas's political chief had also been killed in a separate strike inside Iran. The senior political leader reportedly assassinated in the nation's capital during the early hours of Wednesday morning. The Hamas leader was instrumental in negotiating an end to the war in Gaza and was in Iran to attend the